Okay, in 2016, a book was released by Patrick Gray, Baker Bookhouse, where he basically smears the anti-Pauline Jesus-Centric Christians by associating anti-Paulinism only with people who are basically really, really bad people. So to me, this is our first victory, and I'll explain a principle of what I've learned as a trial attorney. So when I go to court, I might be on the offense, I might be on the defense, and what I always try to look at is listening to the opening statement of my opposing counsel, because if the opposing counsel does not address some issue that I know is key and decisive in the case, that means the lawyer doesn't have any way of deflecting what's going to hurt the case from his or her perspective. So that leaves me completely open to attack from another side and win the case. So that's how you win law. Well, that's how you win legal cases. You find their weakness. You then listen if they understand or have any rebuttal. And if they don't, you destroy it. If they have some rebuttal, you've already pre-prepared your rebuttal to their response, and you destroy that. So whatever it is, the point here is that when Gray does this book, he's professing that he's giving an objective history of the critics of Paul throughout all time in history. And then what does he do? He does it in an extremely feeble manner. So his whole argument implodes, as I put in here. It implodes how feeble it was a defense of the pro-Paul position. He's trying to advance a pro-Paul position by eliminating any credibility to any anti-Pauline position. By what? One, ignoring all major Christian reasonable sources of anti-Paulinism. Two, and that includes Jesus, the book of Revelation, James, Jude, the Epistle of Jude, 2 Peter, and the book of Apocalypse of Peter, which was part of canon until the late 300s. I mean, so he's going a lot against lots of canon sources. He's going against a lot of other Christians who've just over the time in history were anti-Paulinists, but not haters of Paul, just simply he's not a valid prophet, apostle, whatever. Okay, that's number one. Two, how he misconstrued scripture sources, so those mostly from the ones I just mentioned. Three, how he identified anti-Paulinists almost exclusively among the criminally insane, Nietzsche, the monsters of history, Hitler, the terrorists, Al-Qaeda, or the feminists, or similar types. He only has one person he doesn't he categorizes as a Christian who's anti-Pauline, that he gives a nice review that he's a nice guy, Kierkegaard. And then but he then says he's not really that anti-Paul anyway. Okay, which that's not true, but that's how he describes him. So the only person he says this about, he gives kind of a pass. Okay, so we'll begin on that. Here's the book. It's by Patrick Gray. It's entitled Paul as a Problem in History and Culture, and it has a very small subtitle, and we're going to show you what that is. Let me just see if I can show it to you here. Well, it's very hard to see. Let me see if I can take this pen here. Yeah. See that? The Apostle and his critics of history. So we're going to put that on the next slide. So you can't miss, this book is saying this is about Paul and his critics. So really what it is, it's about the critics of Paul. So anybody who's anti-Paul has to fit in this category. So you can't just pick wackadoos, crazies, people like Nietzsche, Hitler, Al-Qaeda can't be the only people who have ever said anything negative about Paul. And it can't just be someone who's kind of mellow like Kierkegaard. You've got to give us who gave the best arguments against Paul, who gave legitimate arguments who were Christians through and through. How about our apostles? How about Jesus's words? How about that? How about the book of Revelation? How about that? Starting there has to be the number one place, won't you think? You would think so, but don't think it'll happen. Don't even dream about that happening. It won't happen. But he'll get into a couple of things. If you want to read our full book review with all the links, and you can go to the books and cross references because we give active URL links. You can go to this page at the site there, and it's or you could search book review Gray Paul as a Problem in History. Okay, so let's just do a little quick introduction of the book. This is the title of the book. I've already given that to you. You can buy it in Kindle for $18. Google Play Edition is a little cheaper, and this is 2006. And this is my book review from 2017, and this is a book from the Christian publishing house, Baker Publishing, that anyone who makes a serious study of Paul must acquire. It purports to be a comprehensive historical review of those critical of Paul throughout the centuries, a review of those who, quote, regard him as a problem, Kindle. I have the Kindle edition, so I'm only able to give you the Kindle pages, so they're not going to correspond with your printed version. I tend to like electronic books these days. It is found endorsement as a, quote, versatile volume to be used in the classroom or for personal reading. So the intention here is this could actually be used in a seminary. So this is what the seminary people are, or theology students are going to see and perceive is what is anti-Paulinism, and this is going to be the authoritative book on it for probably decades. It is a handy resource for scholars or anyone else who wishes to track down original sources that reflect anti-Paulinism. I want you to keep that word anti-Paulinism in mind because that's exactly the right word to do this research objectively. Put that in there, Anti-Pauline. So you can be Jesus-centric and not necessarily anti-Pauline. Anti-Pauline means that you focus on Jesus and you exclude Paul for doctrinal reasons as a Christian. The author, an associate professor of religious studies at Rhodes College, appears to aid Paul's defense, but he never is too out in the open about doing so. So he doesn't seem like he's doing anything, but you have to judge not by appearances but by actions, right? Hence, on the surface, it is mostly an objective presentation. Thus, for what it does discuss, it is typically a useful overview. So it doesn't misrepresent what he's discussing. It's what he's not discussing that's really the problem here. However, Gray never acknowledges there is a legitimate Bible-based reason to reject the writings of Paul. He instead implies most of the time that only those who despise Paul, basically you have to be a hater of Paul to get on some of his lists, reject Paul or his writings. The criticism of Paul is largely attributed by Gray to a non-stop stream of hateful slander, not recognizing anyone having ever criticized Paul to seriously defend Yahweh, God, or Jesus, with the sole exception of Kierkegaard. He does give him a kind mention and some presentation, but he doesn't really give you much. Shockingly, Gray omits entirely any serious mention of the early Orthodox Christian critic of Paul's authority from 207 AD, Tertullian, a grand omission. I mean, it has to be the greatest omission of all time. Here is a book devoted to refuting Marcion by attacking Paul's legitimacy as an apostle. Can't be any more negative than that, you know. Gray also admits where those critiques can be found in Tertullian's writings, as I'll discuss below. All right, so we're going to go look at the things he didn't cover, but I want to get into his stereotyping in a little more in depth, so we get to see the tactic that doesn't work. So if I heard someone in an opening statement talk the way he's talking, this is where I would say I've won my case already. So I want you to hear what he says as he starts his presentation, his main points. Okay, so I want to be clear and fair to show you that he does present one Christian who is not hating Paul, and this guy's supposedly anti-Paul, but then even then, not really. So supposedly, Kierkegaard, he is anti-Paul, by the way. Having ignored or hastily dismissed any canonical source as truly anti-Paul, so we're going to get into that next or later, Gray next moves on to what is supposedly the only legitimate Christian who ever seriously criticized Paul, who was not a hater in all of Gray's research, Kierkegaard. But then Gray portrays Kierkegaard as someone whose criticisms of Paul's influence are outweighed by his supposedly positive statements about Paul. Kindle 2169. Hence, Gray's implies we need not explore too deeply what Kierkegaard's concerns were all about, what Paul's doctrines did to Jesus' gospel. The way Gray leaves the lone figure of Kierkegaard, whom Gray acknowledges was anti-Paul from purely spiritual motives and not from any hatred, is such that we have a complete gap of understanding of what was the fuss raised by Kierkegaard. You basically have no idea what his concerns were. But instead, here's the truth. But Kierkegaard was scathing against Paulinism, if you pay attention. Gray even quotes Kierkegaard saying Protestantism is, quote, completely untenable because it is a, quote, revolution brought about proclaiming the Apostle Paul at the expense of the Master, Christ. Kindle 172. So he does quote one negative statement. At the same time, Gray does not cite nor quote any of the supposedly positive statement by Kierkegaard about Paul or Paul's influence that, quote, outweigh, those are Gray's words, such negatives he expressed about Paul or Paulinism. Thus, we are left to simply accept Gray's hand wave. That's when you put up your hand, you just say, don't worry about it, no big deal, cross the light, go against the red light, just go ahead, don't worry, there's nobody here. The hand wave that makes all Kierkegaard's negative comments go away. These positive remarks must be amazing if they do away with Kierkegaard's most radical rejection of Pauline Christianity. It's not truly Christian at all. That's what he said. He said, Kierkegaard says, I will not call myself a Christian because what is Christianity is no longer Christianity. So you have to understand that he inspired Bonhoeffer to say we have a Christianity without Christ. We're so much about Paul, there's nothing left of Christ anymore. And we're all about faith alone, faith alone, faith alone, faith alone. We have no message. You just have to believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and you go to heaven, as if God would actually do that for people, for just those three facts. It just makes no sense. But anyway, that's the point of Kierkegaard. We have no more Christianity, and so he won't even call himself a Christian. But he's one of the best Christians there ever has been, Kierkegaard. Thus, Gray leaves us subject to that one primary exception of Kierkegaard to see anti-Paul critiques he tracks are supposedly motivated most often by hate of Paul, which we'll see. These haters are what Gray a couple times describes as, quote, Paul despisers. That's at Kindle page 5478, also at 1733, and again at 1916. So all you see is hate, 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 despisers, despisers, despisers. You never get this idea that there's a legitimate basis. And so I'm just going to close this first episode just showing you how deep someone goes. Like I said, the opening statement, the presentation isn't balanced. There is no effort to explain away all the contrary evidence that it isn't just hate. So the real way to deal with an argument is prove all the non-haters who are anti-Pauline Christians, why are they wrong? If I'm wrong, show it to me, man. Show it to me. I want to learn. But if you can't prove I'm wrong, it's because you're afraid and you know you don't have any way of disproving what I'm saying because what I'm saying is actually correct. That's why he has to resort to these kind of tactics. That's when I know I've won my case. So it's just a matter of time that Pauline Christianity is going to fall because I can see it right here in what I'm showing you in this next paragraph. Take this to the bank, everybody. I don't give it another 30 years. It can't last because it's all built on a lie. And with the internet and with truth, not internet crap, internet truth, internet links to Augustine, to the Ebionites, the early church, the Dead Sea Scrolls, things that are true, is destroying this movement of the Pauline dispensation. And it will restore Jesus' rightful position to being our master, our teacher, the sole pastor, the sole teacher, Messiah, the prophet, everything he's supposed to be. Anyway, I got caught up in that. Here it is, stereotyping Paul haters and unchristian anti-Paulinists. Thus, Gray describes the anti-Paulinists as someone you know when you see it, Kindle 272. An implied toxically foul nature. Such an expression, you know when you see it, was made famous by a Supreme Court decision that said as to the illicit obscenity, quote, you know it when you see it. The implied foul nature, supposedly, of all anti-Paulinism emerges when the list is typically described by Gray as, quote, despisers of Paul. I've already mentioned there's 3 references. There's many, but I gave you 3. The name and figures Gray cites leave nothing to doubt. They range from those who either suffered from clinical insanity, Nietzsche, or are anti-Semites because Paul was a Jew while giving Jesus a pass, Hitler, or were defending illicit sex from Paul's verses against it, or are women liberationists who despise Paul for his supposed, quote, hatred of women in particular, Kindle 2865, or who are Muslims in Al-Qaeda who support bin Laden who think Paul is licentious, Kindle 216. The lesson Gray leaves without much effort to bury in his academic prose is that anti-Paulinists are a strange bunch of predominantly Paul haters or anti-Christians or sin defenders. As a Christian reading Gray's work, you would want to run away as far as you can from even a Christian who criticizes Paul or his doctrines as generally taught. Again, all this makes me wish Gray would give us a clue whether anyone ever had a Bible-based reason to reject Paul's writings as works of a false prophet. Even what Kierkegaard's theological problem was with Paul is construed typically to support cheap grace without repentance. That was the problem Kierkegaard had. That is the faith alone doctrine. Is not expressly articulated by Gray. See Kindle at 2164. Gray's closest quote is Kierkegaard's soft statement that with Paul, quote, man gets off a little easier in becoming a Christian. So we are left starving for knowledge of what Christians or true Christians have ever thought about our substantive Bible-based criticisms about Paul, especially his writings, let alone what our Savior thought about Paul. So that's it. Unless you want to hear all about hatred by Hitler, Nietzsche, other people, and maybe one guy who was not a hater and really doesn't even say that much against him is Kierkegaard. That's his book. But to me, it's precious for us to read it, because it's like me watching an opening statement of someone who can't fight me, and I know I'm going to beat him. I just have to get enough time and an opportunity where the people will listen to me. And with juries, I always get a chance because I have a right to stand there. You can have a right to turn off this channel and not listen. But let me suggest, if you're on the other side of this, you should listen to learn. You have to decide if you believe in Paul, then you've got to defeat what I'm saying. And I'm going to show you all the major voices of history. You got to defeat all these people, and it includes Jesus Christ. So you're going to find him a lot harder than anything else. So I'm going to end this first episode there, and we're going to go into this review of Gray's book, and the now we're going to see all the weaknesses. What did he overlook? What was he ignoring? All right. We'll catch you on the next episode. Ciao, bye.